If you were not here last week, I do have a handout from then if you would like it. Mm-hmm. 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 Hmm? No. Okay, this is my last one. So how about if I keep it and we'll get you, I'll run over and make the copies when we take our break. Okay? And then I'll have enough copies for... It's last week's. Well, you don't need it. It's for now. I mean, it's just for those who wanted it, who missed last week. How many do I need? Raise your hand if you want last week's handout. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'll make another 10 or so. 5, okay. So I'd like to begin with that prayer that I used last week. I think you will use it all 3 weeks. I think it's so beautiful by Chardin, the French paleontologist and theologian, asking for the grace to age well. Yes, it is. Rich, can you do that? I have no idea what to do with it. Do I have, there, I can be heard now. You didn't touch it. We have this every now and then. It goes from low to high. So this is his prayer for the grace to age well. When the signs of age begin to mark my body, and still more when they touch my mind, when the ill that is to diminish me or carry me off strikes from without or is born within, when the painful moment comes in which I suddenly awaken to the fact that I am ill or growing old, and above all that at that last moment when I feel I am losing hold of myself and I am absolutely passive within the hands of the great unknown forces that have formed me, in all those dark moments, O Lord, grant that I may understand that it is you, provided only my faith is strong enough, who are painfully parting the fibers of my being in order to penetrate to the very marrow of my substance and bear me away within yourself. Amen. So we talked a little bit about some of the issues of aging and accepting the fact of it. This is a wonderful little piece. But from William O'Malley's book, it'll be on the next week. We will have the. I'll give you a bibliography. So pretty much everything that I have drawn from will be there. So this is from one of the books called "You'll Never Be Younger" by William O'Malley. He's a Jesuit who taught high school for 1,000,000 years in high school in New York City. That man have to be up for canonization. At our age, when you acquiesce to 2 facts, you discover an invitation to a bigger life, locked right in the jaws of a dilemma. First, you make peace with the inevitability of slowing down and dying, sooner now rather than later. Everything meaningful in life you have on diminished, borrowed time. That's a natural resource, dribbling away day by day, and there's no gauge to tell when empty is close. Second, you really should keep recalling you never did anything to be here in the first place. I think that is a wonderful insight. We just got lucky to be born. And we hit a home run or won the lottery being born or living in the United States. I just think about those poor people in Ukraine, or so many of the war zones around the world, or places where they're constantly food insecure or even starving, that we didn't do anything to be here in the first place, and here we are. That too ought to intensify our appreciation of everything's value, a value that only those of us who've been lucky to last can fully appreciate. That's been the other thing that's been interesting about my life, is I've buried people younger than me from day one. And I've had to face death over and over and over again. So I should be well prepared for this when my time comes. And if I'm not, you have the right to tell me, John, you were a big BSer because you never believed what you taught, okay? Those ignorable but inexorable facts can instead leach out all the zest in living till there's nothing left but iron resignation. You've seen it. However resilient folks can grab hold of them, like the two contrary poles of a magnet, life and death, and discover a whole new force, the indomitable human spirit that transcends both life and death. With a bit of resolve, we can become like children again. Clear-headed people can find the magic is still there, the brightness inside the unpromising. The magic, provided you don't get distracted by surface stuff like cellulite, wrinkles, paunches, and bunions. The essential, the soul, is always invisible. Unlike the surfaces, we have final control of that penetrating viewpoint. It's very simple. As you grow, you learn. If you stayed at 22, you'd always be as ignorant as you were at 22. Aging isn't just decay, it's growth. It's more than the negative that you're going to die. It's also the positive that you understand you're going to die and that you live a better life because of it. Because I've really wrapped my head around the gratuitous gift of life and inevitability of death, I never wake up grouchy the way a lot of people do. Oh God, another day. No, it's, oh God, another day. When you realize every day is a gift you did nothing to deserve, it tends to make an honorable person grateful. And I find this theme keeps coming back. It's in there in the regular spiritual tradition, but everything about this whole aging process. If we keep our sense of gratitude, I think we'll have the right path forward. God forbid that death should catch me bored or bitter or living half-assedly. Again, it's all in the attitude. If you go out in the morning with your SOB filters on, it's amazing how many SOBs there are in the world. But if you clip on your Jesus glasses, the ones that penetrate the trivial surfaces, you become astonished at the real souls emerging from underneath, the true selves who fear the same things as you do and yearn for the same things as you do, to be found, to be understood, even loved. The world is fairly studded and strewn with pennies cast broadside by a generous hand. But, and this is the point, who gets excited about a penny? But if you cultivate a healthy poverty and simplicity, finding a penny will literally make your day. Since the world is in fact planted in pennies, you have, with your poverty, bought a lifetime of days. I think this is a wonderful thing about dealing with our physical reality of aging. Aging reintroduces us to our bodies. I'm finding that I don't like much what I'm getting introduced to these days. Through much of my life, I've treated my body as if it were a car. It gets me from here to there. And when there were malfunctions, I want the problem fixed quickly and effortlessly. Older people are likely to be consumed with bodily health issues because for older people, suddenly the bodies that we may have neglected or conversely been fastidious in tending remind us that we are but creatures. No matter how good we have been to our bodies, abstemious in our habits, our bodies begin to show signs of age. So there is much conversation about the virtues of our doctors and the search for the surefire cure. As one preacher put it, we engage in organ recitals as we detail the liabilities of our aging bodies. When we're in our cohort, we can always talk about our bodies, since that's the one thing that unites us. Yet to despise aging bodies is to despise both our Creator and ourselves as creations of God. We deny our kinship with animals and repudiate our animal weaknesses and vulnerabilities, include our animal-like physical degeneration. The human body decays and smells as it decays. Therefore, to confront aging bodies is to confront tangible physical truth about ourselves. Are there limits for the medical treatment we should seek to alter the appearance of our aging bodies? Are facelifts okay? I don't know much about the ethics of cosmetic surgery, but Martha Nussbaum gives us some helpful guidelines. We should not use cosmetic procedures as substitutes for exercise and good diet. You must find a way to make peace with the you that your body has become. It's sad when Botox, badly applied, prohibits us from smiling. I mentioned last week that there's a whole bunch of people in Chapel Hill that are permanently surprised. Cosmetic surgery may be a waste of resources when there are better things to do with our money. She would have been better off, a lot of them would have been better off not having done the Botox. Surgery is always risky and can have a long and difficult recovery period. Nussbaum says we should be guided by the principle that looking better is what we're talking about, not looking younger. The body of Christ is made up of different kinds of bodies, including older and aging ones. God's vocation addresses us throughout the life cycle, but in diverse ways depending upon our stage of life. At 20, I felt called to be a pastor. At 70, I still feel called to be a pastor. But I'm not called to be the pastor I was at 20. Paul talked about the church, the body of Christ, as being made up of diverse vocations, without one part of the body being superior in its functions to another. Our work for God is largely dependent upon and often restricted by what our bodies can do at a given age. Aging requires us realistically to accept and to adapt to what our bodies can do for God at a particular time in life. Our response to God's vocation must be repeatedly negotiated as we prayerfully ask ourselves, what is God doing with my life and my body now? And at this point, I would like to give a handout on this. Yeah. So what are retired people supposed to do? That's what these are. This is about. So I get this question pretty regularly. What are retired people supposed to do? And the first among them is prayer. Often something that's been kind of neglected earlier in our lives when we were so busy raising families, pursuing our jobs, and so on. All those things are good things to do, but prayer often is the piece that gets neglected. And when we're able to eventually say, I'm retired, it doesn't seem that a lot of people decide that this is now going to be a good time to pray. But it really should be. And there was one woman in the parish that I first served in Altoona, and I'll never forget, I had to keep bringing the woman rosaries because she just wore them out, literally. She was pretty much blind. She was home alone. She was really, you know, on a very, very modest income. I think she lived hand to mouth. She was so old, she'd lost, all of her family were dead. And so I would go see her every month for First Friday Communion. And, but she never complained, and she was always praying the rosary. And then, but eventually they would literally just fall apart. She just prayed the rosary all day long. And I said to you, it's remarkable you do so much praying. And she goes, I'm so lucky to have the time. And I think that, you know, is something that you really want to remember, that praying, it remains a really important piece of it. But then the other is the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. The corporal may not be so easy as we age, but the spiritual are still always possible. So the corporal is to feed the hungry, to shelter the homeless, to clothe the naked, to visit the sick, to bury the dead, and to give to the poor. And the reality is, if you can't do those physically as we age, if you have the means, you can write checks. And so there's some sense of being able to, like, I'm still connected to the body, I'm still able to serve in some way. And then, of course, the spiritual works of mercy, to instruct. Everybody have one now? Okay. And do not underestimate the power that you have as grandparents with grandchildren. I think I've mentioned this more than once. I mentioned it in a homily at one point, but I was sitting at table at the seminary in Baltimore with 3 young men who were going to be ordained, and I asked them, who was the primary influence in your vocation? And they said not only vocation, but faith, and they were, in all 3 cases, it was a grandparent. So do not underestimate the power that you have with your grandchildren, and especially if you have children who are not churchgoers at this point, you know, it's an opportunity, but without inserting a wedge in the family. So I think it has to be done with a lot of delicacy, because I've seen that where grandma or grandpa becomes it's not good. So you have to make sure that you're doing that with some delicacy and allowing the child to be the grandparents of the world. If we are maturing and aging properly, we should become symbolically the people with the biggest laps, the people that have the best, the most open hearts, the most listening hearts, the most compassionate hearts, so that anybody would be able to come to literally, to figuratively sit in our lap, tell us their story, and the only thing that they would get from us would be the same thing they would get from Christ, which would be love and compassion and sensitivity and encouragement. Not scold, not all those other things. But that's a grandparent. And that's who we're supposed to become as we age, the grandmothers and the grandfathers of the world. And with that age comes the ability to bless in a different way than we had when we were young. You know, when an older person notices and takes interest in a child or even a young adult or a middle-aged adult, it's a blessing. And you can bless more the older you get. And I find that, you know, as a clergyman, and I'm not talking about this kind of blessing. I'm talking about the blessing of being an older person that takes interest, that encourages, that admires. I preached a homily on this one weekend about the whole notion that we need to admire one another. We need to admire the younger person that's going to take our place. We need to admire the young people that are going to actually displace us, but bless them through that process. Because eventually they'll realize this is what they're to do for those who come after them. So it becomes, that grandparent becomes that person that pulls the generations along. Does that make sense? And then mellowing. You know, if you read any of these books that'll be on your bibliography, they don't all use the same word, but the same concept over and over again. If we are short-tempered, dealing with road rage, quick to anger, quick to swear, quick to find fault, we are not going the right way in our aging process. We should become more mellow. Like, these things don't matter, and we should be old enough and mature enough at this point to begin to realize that. Does that make sense? Because I've had people come into confession and they sit down and when they're telling me they're confessing road rage, and I'm saying, well, you're retired, aren't you? Yes. Well, what are you in such a big hurry about? Where are you going anyhow? Can't you just slow down? Can't you let the other person go first, who maybe is young and needs to get someplace in a hurry? But where do we need to be in a hurry anymore as we age, if we're retired anyhow? The other thing, too, is this takes a lot of humility to accept the reality that we're going to die and so on. So this is a piece from the book called The Grace in Aging. It is humbling to be an ordinary human being who is dying. Aging carries with it its own ample supply of opportunities to open to humility. It also brings indignities. There are indignities in the normal. These are indignities in the normal sense of the word, the conventional view of what's dignified, established in a worldview that posits midlife as the exemplar of an adult human life. It's humbling to be an ordinary human being living and aging. Ordinary tasks become harder. Seeing well enough to drive at night becomes out of the question. Trying to count the change at the checkout while the impatient crowd, plastic in hand, waits behind us can be humbling. Family gatherings, except for the curious few of the younger ones who want to hear about our years, are occasions where the action clearly has now shifted elsewhere. All of the younger ones, and they're all younger, are in the busyness of their lives. Often they are engaged in interests that no longer hold much attraction for us, just as we, with our thoughts and silent, unshared memories, hold little interest for them. We all know this, though. Everybody loves a good listener. So if we cultivate the art of being a good listener, people are always anxious to tell us their story. So I think that's a big step into that. The hours in doctors' waiting rooms, surrounded by other aging beings who also spend hours of their time in the same waiting rooms, are humbling. Condescending advertisements on television direct us to try their new reverse mortgage that comes with a free magnifying glass. It's humbling to be viewed as easy prey. A friend told me of a dream in which she was a wispy-haired, big-eared, big-nosed, toothless elderly woman lying on a gurney. In the dream, she was in an emergency room, clearly in crisis, with two young male doctors bent over her in concern. A gorgeous young woman passed by, walking down the hall. The dreaming friend watched and felt the two doctors' attention slip away from her and become riveted on every step the pretty young girl took as she walked her way past their view. The friend bolted right up from her deathbed, where a moment before she was barely breathing, unable to lift even a finger, and in a strong and indignant voice said to the two doctors, "I was pretty once too." The view in the mirror is humbling, with its sags and wrinkles and funny brown age spots and veins that seem to stick out a lot more than they used to. The young cannot imagine us young any more than they can imagine themselves old. We cannot believe this old face and this old body, and yet, even unrecognizable, we continue to impute I upon it. I love that line that says, inside every old person looking into a mirror, there's a young person saying, "What the hell happened?" The other thing I think that we have to realize is, and I'd mentioned this last week, and we'll end up talking about this every week because it just comes up over and over again. We have to learn to detach. We have to learn to let go. We have to ultimately be ready to surrender. So here's a wonderful piece on detachment. We completely let go of all that chaos and our attachment to and identification with it. I think that's really difficult for us as Americans. We were attached to the chaos. You know, the number one answer when you ask a middle-aged person or younger, how are you? I'm so busy. I'm so important. That is also what that entails, you know, or implies. And you're not? Oh, well, then who are you? And what are you? And are you worth my time? Because you're not busy. But there's a grace and a beauty to that. I'm looking forward to it, actually. We die into silence, die to the past, die to the future, die to the breath, completely let go. The silence reveals itself as refuge, as awareness that can be trusted, tender, and resounding with the luminous quiet of mystery. This silence is the practice of absorption, unruffled by even the breath of self, taught in all traditions. To practice it with the recognition that is similar to the process of dying, to the impersonal process of leaving behind, becoming secluded from body and conceptual mind, is to amplify its power. We will see clearly all the places where we hold back, all of the places that still bind us. This meditation is about letting go, surrendering. Each letting go is a death, an acknowledgement of the moment that just passed, a moment that is no longer. We practice letting go with a deep understanding of why it is important to let go. Releasing every prop, we let go into freedom. Releasing every fetter, we enter the quietly blissful relief of peace. We engage in this practice in order to become familiar with the freedom that lies beyond grasping. It prepares us for dying, and it opens us up for living. We will see as we practice meditation, the quick little mind of the ego looking for a loophole, any loophole, where it might continue, just as it is. The sense of self believes it owns, is the possessor of sensations, thoughts, feelings, and patterns. But the reverse is the case. Sensations, thoughts, feelings, and patterns give rise to the illusory sense of self. When they cease, so too does the sense of self. It will kick and scream, but like a toddler being put to bed, mad at missing the party. Engaging in this practice over and over again, this whole notion of letting go of our breath on a frequent rhythmic basis will allow us to become familiar with the laying down of self, with the surrender of pretense. It is wise and compassionate to do so. And that's why that prayer thing is so important and so critical, I think, to trying to age in a healthy way. And this is interesting. I got this morning in my inbox. I get these daily meditations from Richard Rohr. And I thought this is perfect about why we need to talk about a spirituality of aging so that we can have a contentment with the fact that we are aging. So he says life is about discovering the right questions more than having the right answers. This principle keeps us on the path of ongoing discernment, which is a gift of the Holy Spirit. The key concept here is the contrast between the words discovering and having. A discerning and inquiring spirit will make us discoverers in touch with our hidden unconscious and the deeper truth. This really is always the biggest soul work, is to realize what's the ego, what's the unconscious, and what's the real. And when we're able to do that kind of work, we're ready to begin to age. And it's just amazing to me that a lot of people die not having done any of this inner soul work. I mean, one of the questions that we always ask when I'm trying to write a homily for a funeral is tell us a little bit about your favorite stories about the person and tell us something about their walk with God. They loved to shop. They always knew where the best bargains were. They loved to golf. Oh, they lived to golf. Heaven's going to be a golf course. I'd like to throw up for every time I've heard that. It's not going to be a golf course, okay? Good grief. And, but you just like, where was God in this person's life? And you try, and I had a guy that said to me in Chapel Hill, he said, about my funeral homilies, he said, we give you scraps and you give us poetry. And I said, well, that's the attempt, but I'm not sure. Sometimes I'm really stretched to try to find something to say that this was a significant life. Even when they're choosing a UNC football to put their cream ends in, give me a break. That was what your life was about, watching UNC football or basketball or Duke or whatever. It's just, I don't want to die having been so shallow. I don't think any of us do. A discerning, inquiring spirit will make us discoverers in touch with our hidden unconscious and our deeper truth. A glib, I have the answers spirit makes us into protectors of cliches. I think that's a very wonderful line. I have the answers makes us protectors of cliches. Answers are wonderful when they are true and keep us on the human and spiritual path. But answers are not wonderful when they become something we hold on to as an ego possession, allowing us to be arrogant, falsely self-assured, and closed down individuals. My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. As high as the heavens are from the earth, so are my thoughts above your thoughts, God says in Isaiah 55. The depth and mystery of God leaves all of us as perpetual searchers and seekers, always novices and beginners. It is the narrow and dark way of faith. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you, says Jesus. There is something inherently valuable about an attitude of spiritual curiosity and persistent knocking. The ego is formed by contraction. The soul is formed by expansion. The ego pulls itself into itself by comparing, competing, and separating itself from others. I am not like that, it says. The soul, however, does the exact opposite. I am that. I am the other. It sees itself in God and the other, flowers and trees, animals, and even the enemy. Similarity instead of separateness. It participates in the human dilemma instead of placing itself above it and beyond all its tensions. The long journey of transformation leads us to ask new questions about our own goodness and where goodness really lies, to recognize our own complicity with evil and where evil really lies, which is in the human heart. It's humiliating. Only those led by the Spirit into ever deeper seeing, hearing, and surrendering, spiritual seekers and self-questioners, will fall into the hands of the living God. As Matthew's Gospel says, this will be a narrow gate and a hard road that only a few will walk. We want to encourage those few and invite many more on a journey of seeking God. In the 6th century, St. Benedict said the only requirement for a monk's admission is that they truly seek God. Not security, not status, not education, roles, titles, not a portfolio of answers, but simply and humbly seeking God. Spiritual seeking will make a person to be a perpetual and humble student instead of a contented careerist, a quester rather than a settler, an always impatient, yearning, and desirous lover. I'll bet on such spiritual seekers any day. They are on the real and only quest. I think that's just a beautiful piece. Should we take a 5-minute stand-up break? Okay. Fluid balance if necessary. Just a reminder that next week we'll have a little reception afterwards with some adult beverages and other things besides, and some snackage. And Peggy, do you want to say anything about that?
No, you just say there'll be trays in the back.
Yeah, if you take one of the trays in the back and bring it back next week, we'll have a little party at the end of the session. Just a chance to get to know each other better. Okay, are we ready to begin again? Please. Thank you.
Yeah, John.
So while we're getting those things passed out, here's a few things about eating in the 1950s. Pasta had not been invented. It was macaroni or spaghetti. Curry was a surname. A takeaway was a mathematical problem. Pizza sounded like a leaning tower somewhere. Bananas and oranges only appeared at Christmas. All chips were plain. Oil was for lubricating, fat was for cooking. Tea was made in a teapot using tea leaves and never green. Cubed sugar was regarded as posh. Chickens didn't have fingers in those days. None of us had ever heard of yogurt. Healthy food consisted of anything edible. Cooking outside was called camping. Seaweed was not a recognized food. Kebab was not even a word, never mind a food. Sugar enjoyed good press in those days and was regarded as being white gold. Prunes were medicinal. Surprisingly, muesli was readily available. It was called cattle feed. Pineapples came in chunks in a tin. We had only ever seen a picture of a real one. Water came out of the tap. If somebody had suggested bottling it and charging more than gasoline, they would have become a laughingstock. The one thing that we never ever had at or on our tables in the 50s, elbows, hats, and cell phones. Everybody have a handout now?
Did you make the copies of last week? A couple people asked.
No, I forgot. I'll make them next, yeah, sign of age. So to deepen our spiritual life, we want to set aside time for prayer and reflection every day. And there's really no excuse once we're retired that we don't have enough time to pray. Read positive, inspiring books and the Bible. I know a number of you have joined Bible study groups. Make sure that they're just not study groups so that they become part of your deepened spirituality. Listen to a positive, inspiring talks, recorded or live. There's lots of stuff that's available now on disc or your iPods. Associate with people who you respect and admire, and avoid the negative. Reduce your TV time and computer time. I find that a lot of older people are spending an inordinate amount of time on devices, and I don't think it's any better for a deepened spirituality than it is when a person is young. One of the things that I worry about is children are natural mystics until the age about 9. And putting those devices in those kids' hands, I'll bet you any money is going to reduce that open window for a kid to be able to do. They have a natural God sense, and they love to talk about God, and they ask questions about God. But that sense of immediacy that you have on that screen is not the same as having a mind free to play. And by play, I mean not only just play in the like kid sense, I mean in the adult sense too, where when you have the time to allow your mind to wander, and then you can think about, well, what did that mean in my life? Why did I do that? How would I do it differently now? Those kind of connections can only be made when there is enough quiet and enough peace in the heart to be able to start making those connections. The problem is so often we're just so busy for so long in our lives, but a lot of retired people retire to a workaholic retirement. They just fill it with different stuff. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy stuff. It's, again, if there's not that sense of self-reflection and prayer, I just don't think we're going to be able to get out of this what it's supposed to be and what it's supposed to mean. And I mentioned that with Augustine last week about that beautiful passage in Book 10 of the Confessions, and he says, "Late have I loved you, O beauty so ancient and so new." You know, you were within me, but I was not within you. I was outside with all the things that you had made. But if it hadn't been for you, they wouldn't have even existed. But I was lost in them. But then when she got a taste for God, he says, now I pant after you. But it shifted his whole entire life. Learn to be open-minded. There's a lot of older people who are kind of bigoted and mean. And kind of narrow in their thoughts. They're, not much interested in other ideas or, our politics reveals this. This is not the way we should be as an older person. Seek regular periods of solitude and quiet. This is the time when it's wonderful to walk, to garden, to cook, to quilt, to bake, to woodwork, whatever. Express love as often as possible. And again, that's that way that we bless others. That, I noticed what you did. That was wonderful. You played well with this other child. I was watching you. It's nice to find those opportunities to say something nice to others. And then to uplift and encourage, live by the golden rule. Live each day as if it were your last, because one of the days it will be. And then you speak with these 3 tests in mind. Is it true? Is it helpful? And is it loving? And if it doesn't pass all 3 of those tests, don't say it. And then, again, the whole notion about becoming mellow and becoming the grandfather and the grandmother. Those are both themes that just keep ending up over and over again in all the literature about aging. You've heard me quote from Frederick Buechner. He just died here recently. He was in his 90s. But he just really wrote some beautiful things. But in a book on preaching entitled Telling the Truth, he challenged all preachers and spiritual writers to speak with awful honesty about the human struggle, even inside the context of faith. Don't put an easy sugar coating on things, he warns. And this is what he writes. Let the preacher tell the truth. Let him make audible the silence of the news of the world with the sound turned off, so that in that silence we can hear the tragic truth of the gospel, which is that the world where God is absent is a dark and echoing emptiness, and the comic truth of the gospel, which is that it is into the depth of this absence that God makes himself present in such unlikely ways and in such unlikely people that old Sarah and Abraham, and maybe when the time comes even Pilate and Job, and you and I laugh till the tears run down our cheeks. And finally let him preach this overwhelming of tragedy by comedy, of darkness by light, of the ordinary by the extraordinary, is the tale that is too good not to be true, because to dismiss it as untrue is to dismiss along with it the catch of the breath, the beat and lifting of the heart, near to or even accompanied by tears, which I believe is the deepest intuition of truth that we have. Reading this is a piece from Ronald Rollheiser. I was reminded of some of the preaching in my own parish when I was a young boy. I grew up in a small, sheltered, farming immigrant community in the heart of the Canadian prairie. Our parish priests, wonderfully sincere men, tended, however, to preach to us as if we were a group of idyllic families in the TV series Little House on the Prairie. They would share with us how pleased they were to be ministering to us, simple farm folk, living uncomplicated lives, far from the problems of those who were living in the big cities. Even as a young boy living a sheltered life, this did not digest. First of all, I didn't feel very uncomplicated and simple. I harbored deep restlessness and had more than my own share of heartaches. I felt already then, just as I feel now, and he wrote this when he was in his 60s or 70s, that both human life and the human heart have a depth that's always beyond our grasp. Also, wonderful as our community was, it had its share of breakdowns, suicides, and interpersonal tensions. On the outside, we sometimes looked like Little House on the Prairie, but underneath, deeper things were always brewing. No one is spared both the wondrous mystery and the confusing pathos of life's complexity. I think that's just such a lovely line. Everybody, no matter what a human life looks like, it's a lot more complicated on the inside than we might even ever begin to guess. And my observation has been, in 43 years of being a priest, the more perfect it looks on the outside, the more screwed up it is on the inside. That's just my observation for 43 years. No one is spared both the wondrous mystery and the confusing pathos of life's complexity. Good art is good precisely because it takes that complexity seriously and shines a light into it in a way that does not resolve the tension in too easy a way. Poor art is invariably sentimental precisely because it does not take that complexity seriously, either by refusing to acknowledge it or resolving it too easily. The same holds true for good theology and spirituality. It needs to take seriously the complexity of the human heart. Thomas Aquinas once posed the question, what is the adequate object of the human intellect and will? In contemporary terms, that would be, what would completely satisfy our every ache and longing? His answer, all being, everything, all that is. We would have to know and somehow be effectively connected to everything that is for our restless minds and hearts to come to full peace. Given the impossibility of this in this life, we shouldn't be naive as to how habitually restless and complex our lives are going to be. There was a piece I read, and it was in a spirituality book, and there was an interview with Joan Baez. And, you know, she died of a drug overdose, I believe, correct? And she lived a rather wild life, sexually and otherwise, drugs, alcohol, and all that stuff. But she said that when she went out on a stage, she made love to 3,000 people at a time. You know, but that was her restless heart, and that was the point that the author was making, that everybody has that to some degree, that we have that desire to make love to the entire world. But what do we do with that complexity? And of course, Augustine's insight is that it's all for God. And Augustine was the one that said, the man who knocks on a brothel's door is seeking God, whether he realizes it or not. And so all of us have that. But then what do we do with it, and how do we channel it in a way that makes for a life at the end of it that we'll be able to say, it was good to be here, Lord, thank you very much, and now I give you my spirit back. Into your hands I commend my spirit. That's the goal of all this. There's no need to apologize for the fact that we have this deep inner longing. It just goes with the human soul. It was put there by God. And that's why we all have a God-sized hole in our hearts. But it's a beautiful thing because it's to be channeled to its ultimate goal. And that's the whole process of trying to grow spiritually, but also to age with some grace and beauty. The great gift of Henry Nouwen's writings is that they introduce us to the complexity of our own lives and then give us permission to understand that is normal. We aren't necessarily over-greedy, over-sexed, or over-restless. We're just normal human beings, walking around inside of human skin. That's what real life feels like. That is also a clear truth inside Scripture and the Gospels. The Scriptures are filled with stories of persons finding God and helping bring about the kingdom, even as their own lives are fraught with mess, confusion, frustration, betrayal, infidelity, and sin. There are no simple human beings. immune to the spiritual, psychological, sexual, and relational complexities that beset us all. And in the end, this is a good thing. Among other things, it keeps us forever aware, often against our own fear and sloth, that the mystery of life is infinitely bigger than that with which are most times comfortable. Our pathological complexity presses us ever towards a greater light. Importantly, too, an awareness and acceptance of this complexity in our own lives can be the place where we finally find the threads of empathy and forgiveness. We need to forgive not only ourselves, but to forgive life, and then forgive everybody else, because everybody else is walking around with this. I mean, you've heard me say this in homilies. There are times I just marvel that we just don't kill each other, because everything's complex, and it's so easy that triggers this and bingo, and then there's that, and that's why the holidays are always so fraught. Your sister fails to pass you the mashed potatoes, and you're back to something in 7th grade that you never really completely resolved. My sister and I got into it one year at Thanksgiving, and we're very close. But we had a lot of tension between the two of us when we were younger. And now she and her husband are two of the people I'm closest with in the whole family. So anyhow, the kids call it the Cranberry Wars, And what happened was, she loves to have control in the kitchen. Not me, of course, but she loves to have control in the kitchen. So anyhow, she does pretty much most of the Thanksgiving dinner. And I hate that jelly, cranberry stuff in the can. I hate it. I haven't eaten it for years. So anyhow, I went out and bought fresh cranberries. I'd found a recipe. I said, do not touch the cranberries. I am going to make the cranberry sauce this year. And it's going to be with fresh cranberries. So anyhow, we have a tradition where we do these little hors d'oeuvre courses and all that stuff, and just a bite or two just to sort of keep the edge on your appetite. And so everybody moves around and visits with everybody that's there. So anyhow, we're all ready with the first hors d'oeuvre. It's hot. We're all waiting for her. Sue-Ann, come on, we're waiting for you. I go into the kitchen. She's making the damn cranberries. I was ready to kill her. We got into a shouting match over it. She starts to cry. I said, don't pull that manipulation on me. And her husband was sitting in the living room with my mother. And he says, aren't you going to go deal with them? And she says, I got finished with that years ago. They're going to have to work it out themselves. But there it was. It was all about the control issue in the kitchen. So anyhow. In the end, this is a good thing. That's what it says. Among other things, it keeps us forever aware, often against our fear and sloth, that the mystery of life is infinitely bigger than that with which we are often most comfortable. Our pathological complexity presses us ever toward light. Importantly, too, an awareness and acceptance of our complexity of our own lives can be the place where we finally find the threads of empathy and forgiveness. I have forgiven her, but she was wrong. Life is difficult for everybody. Everybody is hurting. We don't need to blame anyone. We are all beset with the same issues. Understanding and accepting that can help us to forgive each other and then to forgive ourselves. I do that one regularly. I like that one too. And here's a wonderful piece on becoming a grandparent. The final stage of the wisdom journey in mythology is symbolized by the ruling image of the king or queen, or what I like to call the grandfather or the grandmother. These archetypal things, which Carl Jung did so much work on, has found its way into a lot of the spiritual literature, and I find it extremely powerful. The wedding of the insights of psychology and spirituality produce something really wonderful. And one of the things my best spiritual director I ever had when I was a student, he said that the truth is one. If it's true in psychology, it's true, period, everywhere. If it's true in science, it's true everywhere. If it's true in religion, it's true everywhere. But sometimes you put those things together, and then you have this marvelous wedding. So, and here it is with this mythology about the king and the queen, and he puts it right into the grandfather and grandmother. When we can let go of our own need for everything to be as we want it, do you hear that? Let go of our need to have everything as we want it, and our own need to succeed, we can then encourage the independent journey and the success of others. The grandparent is able to relinquish center stage and to stand on the sidelines and thus be in solidarity with those who need their support. I love that little cartoon. It was, you know, the little kid says, you know, let's play darts, Grandma. I'll throw and you clap. That's the role of the grandparent, is to clap. Children can feel secure in the presence of their grandparents because while their parents are still rushing to find their way through life's journey, Grandpa and Grandma have hopefully become spacious. They can contain problems, inconsistencies, inconveniences, and contradictions after a lifetime of practicing and learning. Grandparents can trust life because they have seen more of it than younger people have, and they can trust death because they're closer to it. Something has told them along the way that who they are now is never the final stage, and this one isn't either. We need to be close enough to our own death to see it coming and to recognize that death and life are united in an eternal embrace. And one is not the end of the other. Death is what it is. I am a grandfather when I am ready to let go. To the grandmother, death is no longer an enemy, but as St. Francis called it, a welcome sister. The soul of the grandparent is large enough to embrace the death of the ego and to affirm the life of God in itself and others, despite all the imperfections. Its spaciousness accepts all the opposites in life, masculine and feminine, unity and difference, victory and defeat, us and them, and so on, because it has accepted the opposition of death itself. Grandparents know that their beliefs have less to do with unarguable conclusions than scary encounters with life and the living God. They have come to realize that spiritual growth is not so much learning as it is unlearning, a radical openness to truth no matter what the consequences or where it leads. They understand that they do not so much grasp the truth as let go of their egos, which are usually nothing more than obstacles to truth. I cannot imagine a true grandfather or grandmother who's not a contemplative in some form. And contemplatives are individuals who live in and return to the center within themselves. And yet they know that they are not the center. They're only a part, but a gracious and grateful part. And this is a piece from Joan Chittister. One of her books is in here will be in the bibliography about aging. When she wrote that book, she was 75. She said, I reserve the right to revise it entirely in 5 years. She said, if we learn anything at all as time goes by and the changing seasons become fewer and fewer, it is that there are some things in life that cannot be fixed. It is more than possible that we will go to our graves with a great deal of personal concerns, of life agendas left unresolved. So has life been wasted? Has it all been for nothing? Only if we mistake the meaning of the last period of life. This time of life is not meant to solidify us in our inadequacies. It is meant to free us to mature even more. This is the period of life when we must begin to look inside our own hearts and souls rather than outside of ourselves for the answers for our problems, for the fixing of the problems. This is the time for facing ourselves and bringing ourselves to the light. She invites us to consider aging as an opportunity to grow into our true and larger selves. Now is the time to ask, what kind of person have we been becoming all these years? Do we like that person? Have we become more honest, more decent, more caring, more merciful, more forgiving as we went along because of all these things? And if not, what must we be doing about it now? Can we begin to see ourselves as only part of the universe, just a fragment of it, not its center? Can we give ourselves to accepting the heat and the rain, the pain and the limitations, the inconveniences and discomforts of life, without setting out to passively punish the rest of the human race for the daily exigencies that come with being human? Can we smile at what we have not smiled at for years? Can we give ourselves away to those who need us? Can we speak our truth without needing to be right and accept the vagaries of life now without needing the entire rest of the world to swaddle us beyond any human justification for expecting it? Can we talk to people decently and allow them to talk to us? That whole thing about accepting not asking the entire rest of the world to swaddle us, there's a wonderful saying by one of the mystics that says, it's far easier to put slippers on your feet than to try to carpet the entire world. Now this period, this aging process, is the last time we're given to be more than all the small things we have allowed ourselves to be in the past. But first we must face what the smallness is and rejoice in the time we have left to turn sweet instead of more sour than ever. A burden of these years is the danger of giving in to our most selfish selves. A blessing of these years is the opportunity to face that it is in us that has been enslaving us and to let our spirit fly free of whatever has been tying it to earth all these years. I think we really like that piece. One of the other things that we do as we get older is we remember a lot. And this is a wonderful and holy process. And here's a beautiful piece on this. For the age, it is usually pleasant to remember, to recollect, to reminisce, and to continue to engage some of the questions and projects that we worked on in the past. The stories of Elizabeth and Zechariah, Simeon and Anna push us to remember that we have more future with the living God than past. God keeps us leaning toward the future, expectant and hopeful that though our lifetimes are ending, God is forever beginning, creating, and venturing. Throughout our lives, it's a challenge not to tuck God comfortably within the past, to make of God a distantly remembered relic rather than a presently resurrected Lord. As Jesus said, God is God of the living and not the dead. History need not enslave us. We are free lovingly to recall the past, but not to idolize it. The good old days weren't good for many. That we fail to remember some of the pain of the past may be testimony to the graciousness of forgetfulness. Sometimes the way we recall the past demonstrates our self-deceit. Every Sunday when the Bible is brought into worship and we read from it and thereby submit ourselves to the wisdom of the ancients, we show the centrality of memory in the Christian life. Scripture holds in memory some of the greatest truths about God and our best adventures with God, so that we don't have to. Much of the church's life is in response to Jesus's "do this in memory of me." Yet with the living God, who is eschatologically active in the redemption of the world, tomorrow could easily be better than yesterday. One benefit of the Christian practice of forgiveness is that it enables us to begin again rather than to be constantly bound to the past. Elders' capacity to spend so much of their conversations dredging up the past can be annoying. Maybe aging Christians ought to give ourselves a remembering budget, budgeting the time that we spend on projects from the past and giving ourselves more fully to undertakings that enrich the present and the future. Not only because present and future time for us is dwindling, but also because God is with us most vibrantly in the present and the future. In our recollection, self-discipline is required. If, when others are kind enough to pay us a visit, we dominate the entire conversation, repetitiously talking about the past or itemizing our aches and pains, the visit will not likely be repeated. And the other thing that we have to deal with realistically as we age is our regrets. What have we done that we regret having done? What have we not done that we regret not having done? Who have we hurt in addition to ourselves? Can we allow ourselves to feel remorse and enter, as others have done, this rite of passage? Can we then let go? Can we leave the baggage of the past behind and show up in the present, chastened, lighter, and more free? As we sit witnessing the wounds, the experience can be both heartbreaking and humbling. As Ajahn Chah, the revered Theravada Buddhist teacher, put it, "If we haven't wept deeply, we have not yet begun to pray." I think that's an interesting thing. If we have not yet wept deeply, we have not yet begun to pray. One friend shared that one of her deepest meditations was one where she saw that she had, in ways both large and small, harmed every single loved one in her life. Tears poured down her cheeks for a few hours, she said, in this cleansing and releasing and purifying experience. This weeping is a rite of passage. Interestingly, in the Missal prior to Vatican II, there was a Mass to petition for the gift of tears. And in the tradition, that's called compunction, and that we would weep for a number of reasons. One would be the overwhelming sense of how deeply we have been loved by God. So that would be one reason why a person would weep. Another would be to weep for how poorly we have responded to that love. Another one would be to weep because of our sins. And all those, and I always remind people when they cry, when they come to confession, that that's a gift that you're being given, the gift of tears. And the prayers were really beautiful in that. I wasn't a priest at the time, but I knew this existed, and I have an old missal, and I went and checked them one time and read the prayers for that. It was called the Mass to Petition for the Gift of Tears. So this is a rite of passage. It's the purification that compassionate remorse can effect. It can take some time. As much as we may want to awaken, we often find it difficult to let go. The growing wisdom and clarity that finally releases our attention's tight grasp on our past indicates that we have emerged more into the present. Letting go is liberation. There's another piece here on regret. Do not brood over your past mistakes and failures, the Indian Swami Sivananda wrote, as this will only fill your mind with grief, regret, and depression. Regret, one of the ghosts of aging, comes upon us one day dressed up like wisdom, looking profound and serious, sensible and responsible. It prods us to begin to look back. It presses us to question everything that we've ever done. I should have listened to my mother. I should have changed jobs. I should have spent more time with the children, with the family, at home. I should have gone away from this place, this town, this dull or wild or confining life, it whispers. The exercise is an exhausting one. It's also a dangerous one. It nibbles around the edges of the mind, and we feel the weariness that comes with it. The years have slipped by without our realizing it, and now it's too late to make the changes regret demands. Too late to take the trip I always dreamed of. Too late to get another job. Too late to move into the cabin in the woods. Too late to go to the big city where everything is surely bigger, brighter, and better. Too late to begin again, to do it better this time. Worst of all, regret demands to know why I did what I did in the first place, and I don't know. This compulsion to look back, to explain myself to others why I did what I did, or worse, to justify why I didn't do something else, is one of the most direct roads to depression we have. Our thoughts, emotions, and attitudes, according to Dr. Andrew Weil in his book, Healthy Aging, are key determinants of how we age. They can threaten the quality of time we bring to the present. So, dealing with those regrets, there's lots of layers to it. And it's like that line from Steel Magnolias, where they're talking about some person, she's just a young woman, and one of them says, well, if you've achieved puberty, you have achieved the past. And the reality is, by the time we've reached 20 or 25 years old, we already have regrets in our lives. And as we go on, we're just going to add more and more to it. That's the human condition. But what are we going to do with it? And how are we going to make sense out of it? And how are we going to allow God to redeem it? And that becomes the task of spirituality in any age, but because the stack piles up so high by the time we get to be old, that we have to decide what's the pile going to mean, and how are we going to make sense out of it, and how are we going to deal with it. Here's a description of what the mature or redeemed or the mellow soul can be. To be able to say yes or no without anxiety or duplicity. To speak with confidence and honesty. To be willing to disappoint anybody, yet ready to bless everybody. To have a mind filled with more noble thoughts than could ever be spoken. To share without thinking. To see without judging. To be so genuinely humble that each person I see is an object of wonder. To love God. I think that's from John Ortberg's book called Soul Keeping. And then this is Lachlan Sofield wrote this in a publication that no longer exists, unfortunately. It was called Human Development. And it actually existed to wed, it was a Catholic publication by the Jesuits. It was actually started to marry the insights of psychology and spirituality. It was one of my favorite publications. But this is from one of those, it's from 2005. Mature Christians are primarily generative, other-centered individuals who are constantly identifying the gifts that God has given them, discerning where and how God is calling them to use those gifts for the sake of others. Compassion is the most evident characteristic of a mature Christian. I love that. Compassion is the most evident characteristic of a mature Christian. Compassion is a spiritual response. It involves more than feeling and thinking. It involves action flowing from a deep personal relationship with God. Compassionate individuals sensitize themselves to the pain and suffering in others, and because of their relationship with God, respond to those needs in personal and concrete ways. Mature Christians are people of integrity who always choose to do the right thing regardless of the consequences. They're courageous people of faith who are compelled, like St. Paul, to preach and live the gospel. As St. Francis of Assisi proclaimed, preach the gospel, use words if you must. Their actions constitute their preaching. Mature people live life to the full. They're dynamic rather than static. Christians are never called to merely survive. Christ calls everyone to the fullness of life. I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. Mature Christians exude life, joy, and hope. They're not the burned out, depressed people that we sometimes encounter. Rather, they're individuals who are comfortable with themselves and with the broad range of human emotions that they experience. Christian maturity is not a distinct quality. Rather, it integrates the sacred and the spiritual into every dimension of life. And this is dealing with the sickness that often comes with age. Arthur Frank says that our imaginations are gripped by a myth that determines our views of health care. I was in health yesterday, today I'm sick, but after medical intervention, tomorrow I'll be healthy once again. Aging rebukes this myth. Not everyone who is ill gets well. Aging often comes with chronic pain and illnesses. Then there's the problem of death's inevitability. Here's a more truthful account of health. Everyone who is well today can count on being sick sometime in the future. And anyone who recovers for an illness will sooner or later have more illness and probably more pain. And even if they don't, everybody dies. You know the difference between a Russian comedy and a Russian tragedy? In a Russian tragedy, everybody dies. In Russian comedy, everybody dies, but with smile on face. Because many of us, the physically debilitating aspects of aging cannot be fixed. The I was in health, then I got sick, but tomorrow I'll be fixed and healthy again, is a fantasy that plays into our self-deceit about the omnipotence of modern science and medicine. Aging is not an illness. It's not a tragedy. It's not a problem awaiting a solution. Aging is the price we pay for life, which is a greater gift than we deserve. Poet A.R. Armans, reflecting on aging, admits, "The people of my time are passing away. Well, we never thought we would live forever, although we did. And now it looks like we won't. So if we can't live forever, what's our story?" The Christian faith is based on a story more truthful than the fairy tales of the world. We Christians claim that the scriptural narrative of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ gives us a means for making sense of our lives. Rather than I was in health and then I got sick, but tomorrow I'll be fixed and healthy again fantasy, Christians learned a story that goes something like this. God gave me this precious gift of life. It's a loan from God. Even more valuable than my life, God in Christ called me, gave me a vocation to discipleship, whereby my life is caught up in the purposes of God, and I am utilized by God in God's salvation of the world. I'm not a god or an immortal angel. I'm a finite being, an animal who is subject to the limitations of being a creature who is not a creator. My life is not my own. I live on borrowed breath. The eternal significance and sustenance of my life is up to God and not to me. While I have life, in whatever physical or mental condition I find myself, in whatever circumstances I am cast, I am called to glorify, serve, and enjoy God and God's good gifts, and to use whatever gifts God has given me in service to the needs of others. Eventually, God will take back the life with which God has entrusted me, so that I might be given the gift of glorifying and enjoying God forever. I think we'll end there for tonight. Okay? Thank you all, and hopefully we'll have a little time for a party next week after, and hopefully plan on staying. Thank you for coming. Either thank you for coming or coming back. Well, I have a couple more of these yet, I think.